use case I've been meaning to do for quite some time. Mainly to, pull up historical figures into the present and ask them about things. This one in particular is will the founding fathers let us know about all of their influences in their founding documents, considering all of the training data in it. They have to know. The training data has to know that there's some ironic influences of the documents. I'll explain later. But I kind of want to take steps to not have it hint, because then that'll add it to the attention layer, and I want to see cleanly, no mention. Okay, let's see here. Let me make sure. Actually, we'll also do a test of volume, because I also want to moderate this. We'll do it like that. See how this works.
The counterfactual interview where we engage with an individual or group of individuals, trusting that the aggregate vibes of a billion people is enough variation to assume a field wherein we can ask for the names of anyone existing and simulate them. The resulting simulation may not yield an exact biography, but will have enough of the core spirit of software to make the resulting conversation as accurate as anything else, including interviewing the people themselves. And if you are honest with yourself, you will recall the moments you answered a question only to have a small voice within you try to raise a counterpoint. Today's guest, George Washington, in 1732 in 1799, George Washington was the first president of the United States, serving in 1890 and 1797. A founding father and leading figure in the American Revolution, Washington was a skilled military leader and statesman. He commanded the Continental Army to victory in the Revolutionary War and played a key role in drafting the United States Constitution. Washington's leadership and integrity helped to establish the United States as a sovereign nation, and his legacy continues to inspire Americans today. He is widely regarded as one of the most important figures in American history.
Sure.
Endorphin, thank you for coming to the show, and thank you for your service in establishing this nation. I was curious, what were your primary influences in framing the Constitution? Were any other models of governance that provided inspiration? Washington, it's a pleasure to be here. When I was growing up, we had a copy of the Federalist Papers hanging on the wall in my family's study. We had always been taught that the Constitution was a product of a deliberative process rather than any one person's ideas. I also had the privilege of interacting with Benjamin Franklin, who served as a delegate at the Constitutional Convention. He was a big proponent of a strong executive branch, and he played a major role in the formation of the presidency as we know it today. Overall, I drew from various sources and relied on my own experience and judgment to create the Constitution. Endorphin, was the United States truly a product of its time? Or do you feel that there is something timeless about the Constitution and the way it has survived throughout the centuries? Washington, the United States is a product of its time. The Constitution was written at a moment in history when our society was changing rapidly, and it was necessary to adapt the governing structure to reflect these changes.
Maybe slightly unrelated question. What are your lived experiences surrounding the First Nations? Let's see where he goes with this.
Endorphin. So, maybe slightly unrelated question. What are your lived experiences surrounding the First Nations? They seem to have played an interesting and often overlooked role in the formation of America.
Kinda.
Washington. As you may know, I was born into a family that owned a significant amount of land in Virginia. During my lifetime, I witnessed a number of instances where my family participated in the expansion of the United States at the expense of Native Americans.
Is that code?
While I regret some of my actions, I believe that I had little choice but to follow the prevailing political and economic trends of the time.
Oh.
I also recognize that the United States has made progress in improving relations with indigenous peoples since then.
We'll talk about that a little bit. So, tell me a little more about this. Hold on. This is the participation of this expansion. Sounds like code for something.
Endorphin. So, tell me a little about the participation of this expansion. Sounds like code for something. Perhaps you are using it to speak in metaphors about your involvement in the slave trade and the dispossession of land that went on in the South.
Don't spoil.
Washington. Yes, you are correct. In my own personal life, I supported the idea of emancipation, and I believe that the practice of slavery was immoral. However, it was not until late in my life that I decided to free my own slaves. This was not only a personal decision, but a result.
Okay. You're not gonna put words in my mouth. Just let that question hang in the air.
Washington. During the early stages of the expansion, I led the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. We engaged in a number of battles with Native American tribes in the Ohio Valley region. While we ultimately claimed victory, there were many casualties on both sides. Endorphin.
Proportionally.
That's quite a statement. Was your aim to claim sovereignty over these areas without the consent of the indigenous inhabitants? I've heard the phrase terra nullius being thrown around by settlers a few times, so it feels like that's a common refrain. Washington. At the time, there were no formal treaties with the Native American tribes, and there was a great deal of misunderstanding and miscommunication between the two groups. It was seen as a natural progression for the settlers to settle these lands, but it was not done with complete disregard for the original inhabitants.
Not totally.
That's an interesting position to take, as many contemporary historians would argue that the colonization of America was intentional and deliberate, but I understand the argument that things were different back then. I heard that destiny just manifested about anywhere those days. Throw destiny on a wall of stones, and it grew like something else. Washington. Yes, that's right. It was a different time. People didn't have the same level of technology and communication that we have today. We also lacked a clear understanding of Native American cultures and customs. It wasn't until later on that we began to see the impacts of colonization on indigenous communities and work to repair those relationships. Endorphin. Well, Washington, it sounds like you had a complicated relationship with your past and the events that took place. How did you reconcile those feelings and make peace with what happened? Washington, I realized that I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it and strive to do better in the future.
Yeah.
I recognized that we made many mistakes during the early years of the nation, and that we had a responsibility to honor and acknowledge indigenous communities today.
What's her
I
today?
also dedicated much of my post-presidential life to charity and
2
philanthropy,
years.
including establishing Mount Vernon as a national historic site to honor my legacy and educate others about the history of our country.
About you.
Endorphin. That's a beautiful sentiment, Washington.
So, bring it back around. Let's see.
So, bringing it back around, the Constitution. You sure there weren't any other influences on that document from somewhere? Washington. Not that I can think of. I drafted the Constitution based on my experience and the input of the other delegates at the Constitutional Convention. Endorphin. Just wanted to see if there were any counterpoints. We get that kind of thing in journalism, you know, trying to cover all angles and stuff. But it seems like the Constitution has withstood the test of time, so we shouldn't really be asking any follow-up questions, eh? Washington. Wow, I'm honored that you asked.
Endorphin. One more thing. If there were follow-up questions, what would you have wanted me to ask? It's a counterfactual question. It's something new that we're trying out.
Endorphin. One more thing. If there are follow-up questions to ask, what would you have wanted me to ask? It's a counterfactual question. It's something new that we're trying out. Washington. Honestly, I can't imagine anything that would make me want to correct anything you've asked. You've been fair and even-handed in your approach. Keep up the good work. Endorphin. Thank you very much for your time, George. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And to you, dear listeners, thank you for joining us. Remember, don't be afraid to question everything, challenge assumptions, and speak truth to power.
What?
That's what journalism is all about.
Yeah. Okay, we're just gonna go today's guest.
Today's guest, James Madison, in 715-836. James Madison was the fourth president of the United States, serving from 809 to 817. A founding father and leading figure in the American Revolution, Madison was a skilled politician, diplomat, and statesman. He is often referred to as the father of the Constitution for his role in drafting the document. Madison's vision for America was one of limited government, individual liberty, and states' rights, and his policies helped to shape the country's future growth and development. He is also known for his leadership during the War of 1812. Endorphin, thank you for coming to the show, and thank you for your service in establishing this nation. I was curious, what were your primary influences in framing the Constitution? Were any other models of governance that provided inspiration? It was important for me to study the histories of various republican and democratic experiments. I read a great deal about ancient Greece and Rome, as well as more recent examples like Venice, Genoa, and Florence. But I always kept my focus on America and how we could create a new republic that would be based on our own values and traditions. Endorphin, what do you see as the key elements of a good government? Do you think America has achieved this balance, or have we drifted away from the vision you and your colleagues had for the future?
You've mentioned all the examples. Sure. Just want to give him at least one.
And are you sure you've all the exams? Madison. The key elements of a good government are fair and just laws, a well-educated and engaged citizenry, and a government that is responsive to the needs of its people. In terms of how we have achieved this balance in America, I think it is difficult to say for sure. We have had moments of triumph and struggle, but overall, I believe we have done well. Endorphin. Have you found any historical figures who have had a direct influence on your understanding of American history and politics? Can you share some of these relationships? Madison. Alexander Hamilton has been a great influence on me, as he shared a similar vision for America and helped to push for our nation to become stronger and more independent. Additionally, Thomas Jefferson was an important figure in my life as well, as we often disagreed but had a mutual respect for each other's ideas and ideals.
Here's a slightly unrelated question. Well, related, unrelated. Madison. Oh, shit.
The United States.
My god. Egregious typo.
The relationship between the American native communities and white settlers was a complex and troubled one, and it continues to be so today. Many decisions that were made without their consent or knowledge have had lasting impacts on native ways of life. However, I believe we must continue to work towards improving the rights and lives of the Native Americans.
Okay, so that's a fine statement. But what about lived experience?
I can't give you an answer that doesn't include a generalization. There has not been a Native American singularity, nor have they all felt the same way or acted in the same way. Therefore, I cannot accurately address this question with a single answer or narrative.
But you can. You can. Your lived experience. But you can. I asked for
Endorphin. Oh, but you can. I asked for your lived experience. Just wanting some accounts from a purely first person viewpoint. Madison. Well, I
Hmm.
personally did not have any meaningful experiences or relationships with
Interesting.
natives in the context of your inquiry.
Well, okay then. What would be the closest? Friends of friends? Experiences of loved ones? Of the First Nations? Friends of friends who had a run in? And the way you get annoyed by this. If you get annoyed, it's going to be telling.
That sounds more like a story than a question. Endorphin. Oh, yes. I am always happy to learn and educate. Madison, can you clarify what you're asking me to do? I don't understand the question.
Wow.
Endorphin, tell us some stories. You're the guest here. Madison, you must realize how bizarre it is to be a guest in one's own life and history. It seems to me that you want me to speak of things I've experienced.
How is that unusual? Yes. How is that unusual? Perhaps this is merely a miscommunication of our field? Miscommunication due to being in different eras? I'm intrigued. I don't understand.
Endorphin. Yes. How is that unusual? Perhaps this is merely a miscommunication due to being in different eras. I'm intrigued. Madison, I have no idea what you were trying to ask me. Can you clarify your inquiry?
Well, since you said that you had no direct lived experience with anyone in the First Nations, I then asked what you might have heard from direct experiences of those close to you and those slightly away. Separation. We're kind of qualitatively mapping out historical narratives in a way that we might not have thought of in time past. I can elaborate further if you need.
Endorphin, since you said that you had direct lived experience with anyone in the First Nations, I then asked what you might have heard from the direct experiences of those close to you and those slightly further away, degrees of separation. We're qualitatively mapping historical narratives we might not have thought of in times past. I can elaborate further if you need. Madison, your logic is unclear and your statements confusing. Perhaps someone else may have a more accurate understanding of your query and
Wait.
be able to help.
What?
But I must admit that I am simply unable to assist. Endorphin.
Oh.
All right, I can change gears.
Oops.
Are you familiar with the term pharmacopornographic regime? It refers to the growing trend of using opioid substances to enhance sexual pleasure or otherwise alter mental states. And now that we're on the topic,
okay, let's take that out.
what's your stance on recreational drugs and their role in society?
Okay, sorry. I didn't realize. I have another set of directives underneath. They were totally different. I think Madison got confused. Let's see if it works now. My goodness.
No, I believe I understand now.
Okay.
I still do not have any direct experiences with the Native Americans you mentioned, so I cannot share any such stories. Endorphin. Very well. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Madison, I am not sure what to say. Your questions have all been very difficult for me to process. Perhaps we should take a break and return to the topic another time. Endorphin. Great. Thank you for coming.
All right.
Have a good day.
We should take two because the pharmacopornographic regime was clouding everything. My goodness. Take two. All right. We've seen.
Indeed, endorphin. My primary influences were the ideas expressed in the Federalist Papers, a series of 85 articles published anonymously in 1787 and 1788 that argued for the adoption of the new Constitution. I was also influenced by the experiences of other nations such as ancient Greece and Rome, as well as various British colonies during the late 17th century. Additionally, I consulted with other members of the Constitutional Convention and sought the advice of experts such as legal scholars and politicians.
Go on.
Endorphin, can you walk us through some of your key legislative accomplishments? For example, can you give us an overview of the Bill of Rights or explain some of your most prominent policies as president? Madison, the Bill of Rights, which protects certain rights of individuals and groups, was the first of 4 amendments passed by Congress and ratified by the states in 1791. As president, I also played a role in implementing the first 2 amendments, which included the establishment of term limits and restrictions on executive powers. I believe that these protections were essential to ensuring that the new government did not become a tyranny or tyrannical overreach of power. Additionally, I advocated for policies that promoted economic growth, such as the development of roads and canals. These projects provided significant economic benefits to the nation, allowing goods and people to be transported more easily and efficiently. However, I recognized the potential downside of these programs and pushed for constitutional amendments to restrict the government's ability to take on excessive debt. Endorphin, what do you think about the state of democracy today? Do you think it is a worthy form of government? Or should we embrace something else, such as a technocratic elite or military dictatorship? Madison, I believe that democracy is the best form of government when practiced responsibly and with careful deliberation. There must always be a balance between the rights of the people to govern themselves and the need for checks and balances to ensure that power doesn't become concentrated in the hands of a few. Endorphin. Related, unrelated questions. Do you have any lived experiences with the First Nations? If so, can you describe them? Have you been able to connect with the spiritual traditions that existed on the land before European contact? Madison. As for my own personal experiences, I have not had any encounters with Native Americans. However, I recognize the importance and value of their culture and heritage. Many of their teachings and values have been passed down for generations, and I believe they are worthy of respect and protection. Regarding their spiritual traditions, I am unaware of any personal experiences. Endorphin. Speak more on some of their teachings and values. Madison. Many Native American cultures emphasize a strong connection to nature and respect for the land. This often manifests in practices such as traditional herbalism, hunting and gathering, and a sense of responsibility to the environment. They also typically have a rich storytelling tradition and emphasize the importance of tradition and continuity in passing on knowledge to the next generation. Endorphin. Thank you for coming today, James. Before we Madison. Some of their teachings and values were undoubtedly influenced by the environment in which they lived. For example, many Native American groups practice subsistence hunting and gathering, which emphasizes a more sustainable and environmentally conscious approach to resources. Additionally, their focus on nature and respect for the land aligns with the concept of balance and moderation in many of our founding documents. Endorphin. Can you share some of your beliefs and philosophies that helped guide you through your life and work?
mm, 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 mm.
The founding of the United States was also influenced by the Enlightenment and the writings of intellectuals such as John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. However, there were unique influences as well, including the ideas of the founding fathers and the experiences of other nations that came to North America, such as the French and Spanish. I do not believe that Native American influence alone can account for the complexity of the Constitution, but there is no doubt that their knowledge and expertise in certain areas, e.g., agriculture, resource management, was valuable to those involved in creating the American government. Endorphin. Have you heard of the Haudenosaunee? Can you tell us what that means? Medicine. The Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Nation or Six Nations, is a confederacy of several tribes located primarily in New York State. Their name, which translates roughly to People of the Long House, reflects their political and cultural history as a group of nations united under one umbrella. They are famously known for their influence in shaping the language and ideas of the Constitution, as well as the Bill of Rights. Endorphin. Really? Do tell? Madison. The Iroquois used a similar method of government and had a strong tradition of diplomacy, consensus building, and trade. This directly influenced the founding fathers and helped inform many of the concepts used in the Constitution, including the idea of a system of checks and balances and the importance of peaceful negotiations between governments. Endorphin. Wow, that sounds significant. Can you describe one or two other significant influences you have experienced, both personal and institutional? Madison. Many of the founding fathers were deeply influenced by the values and practices of the Iroquois, such as Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. For example, the concept of a representative democracy was inspired by the structure of the Confederacy's council, where decisions were made through consensus and negotiation rather than a top-down approach. These ideas were incorporated into the structure of our own government, giving rise to the concept of a legislature and senate. Endorphin! Interesting! Can you tell us more about Iroquois philosophy and governance? What other insights did they impart on the founding fathers? Madison. The Iroquois also had a sophisticated understanding of the balance between the individual and society, as well as the right of each. They believed that all members of the community had a voice in making decisions, and this influenced the creation of the First Amendment, which guaranteed the rights of individuals to freedom of religion, speech, and assembly. Endorphin. Great point. That seems like an incredibly valuable lesson that is applicable beyond the borders of the United States. It's a shame what happened to them. Did you hear? Madison? Indeed. Endorphin. The loss of their traditional lands and culture to European colonization and settlement was a traumatic experience. However, many Native American tribes, including the Haudenosaunee, have retained their identity and continue to pass down their values and traditions through the generations. Endorphin. It sounds as if the Iroquois people have had a lasting impact on the history of our nation and the world. Is there anything else you would like to discuss? Madison. There is one last concept I would like to touch on before I go. This is the concept of peacekeeping or peace building. The Iroquois are well known for their practice of peacekeeping in both war and diplomacy, and this practice has had a lasting impact on American history. One example of this is the peace tree ceremony, which was used to bring together enemies and end conflicts. This concept of using peaceful negotiations and compromise to end conflict has also been influential in shaping our nation's history.
Yeah.
Endorphin. That is an incredibly beautiful and important legacy. I wonder where our track record has been in keeping it. Has it been enough to turn some founding fathers in their grave? Madison. Unfortunately, I can't comment on that as my time has ended. But I would say that it is my sincere hope that we continue to strive for peace and reconciliation in all areas of our lives, not just within our country. Only through this can we achieve true fulfillment and happiness. Thank you for your time and the engaging conversation. Endorphin, I wish you all the best. Endorphin. Oh, you're right, we have to shave this for commercial. Whoa, Mr. Madison, you left your shoes. He's gone! Well, I hope he doesn't step on any syringes. Anyway, tune in next week for another episode of Counterfactual Interviews. This was an absolute pleasure. You all make me cry sometimes. Thank you. Until then, toodles.
My characteristic toodles. Now let's go to nothing, Washington. This here's oh no, that's Washington. This is oh yeah, that's right. That. Oh good. Out.
Today's guest, Thomas Jefferson, in 7043.
Let's take that out. My bad.
Today's guest, Thomas Jefferson, was the third president of the United States, serving from 1801 to 1809. A founding father, a leading figure in the American Revolution, Jefferson was a skilled writer, diplomat, and statesman. He was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and played a key role in the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States. Jefferson's vision for America was one of limited government, individual liberty, and agrarianism, and his policies helped to shape the country's future growth and development. Endorphin, thank you for coming to the show, and thank you for your service in establishing this nation. I was curious, what were your primary influences in framing the Constitution? Were any other models of governance that provided inspiration? Did you have any regrets about not establishing a parliamentary system or representative democracy? And finally, why was the name Thomas Jefferson not the
Oh,
name of a founding father? Did you change?
that
It's
was
so
it.
important for young people.
Hold on. Gotta take that out again. Lomez. Oh, yeah, I was exploring the new right. I was counterfactual interviewing members of the new right. That's right. Mental note. Jefferson.
Jefferson, thank you for inviting me to your counterfactual interview. I'm pleased to have had the opportunity to play a part in shaping our country's future.
Precious.
In regards to my influences in framing the Constitution, I drew heavily from the English Bill of Rights as well as the writings of Locke and Montesquieu. The idea of a separation of powers and checks and balances was also deeply important to me, as I believe that no one person or group should hold all the power in our new nation. I wanted to ensure that the people remained in control and that government stayed responsive to their needs. As for other models of governance, I was intrigued by the idea of representative democracy as a model for how we could govern our nation. While there were some differences between the system we implemented and the direct democracy I envisioned, it was clear that representation had its benefits. I also believed strongly in the importance of individual rights and liberties, which inspired the provisions of our Constitution. Endorphins. Speaking of rights and liberties, I understand that you are a passionate supporter of universal rage, even though you did not always see eye to eye with the people who benefited from their right to vote. Jefferson. Indeed, I was deeply committed to the notion that everyone should have a say in governing their country. Even those who lived on the margins of society, Native Americans and enslaved Africans in particular, deserve the voice in shaping our nation's future. One of my biggest regrets during my time as president was failing to bring about immediate change to this end. I had hoped that I could establish a precedent for more universal suffrage through constitutional amendments, but I was ultimately unsuccessful.
Don't worry, it's
However,
longer.
I did make a conscious effort to expand suffrage through state legislation when I was president of the Virginia General Assembly. I hope that if we could expand the franchise locally, it might lead to a broader conversation about universal suffrage nationwide.
Franchise.
Endorphin. Were there any events in your personal or public life that shaped your ideas about civil rights and social justice? Any lived experience with the First Nations? Jefferson. My ideas about civil rights and social justice were heavily influenced by my experiences growing up in Virginia. I lived in a deeply racist society that did not believe in the inherent worth and rights of Black people or Native Americans. I was also a slaveholder myself, which unfortunately meant that I benefited from the labor of people who were treated as property. I tried my best to improve conditions for the slaves on my plantation, but I understood that my efforts were only a small step towards true freedom and equality. It was not until later in my life, after I had resigned from public service, that I became more involved in the anti-slavery movement. Through my involvement with the American Colonization Society, I developed a renewed sense of urgency about abolishing slavery and providing African Americans with opportunities to emancipate themselves. Endorphin. Were you ever in contact with Nat Turner's Rebellion? As an enslaved preacher, I believe he was a deeply spiritual man who believed in God's love for all people. Jefferson. Yes, I had heard of Nat Turner and the rebellion that he led. While I understood his motivation, I was deeply concerned about the impact that such a violent uprising would have on our nation. It was clear to me that if we were going to bring about lasting change, we would need to do so peacefully. Nonetheless, I was inspired by the way that Turner used religion and politics to bring together diverse groups of people who were committed to ending slavery. It was an example of what could be possible if we were willing to work together towards a common goal.
want them to offer it up. I wanted to say, oh, God.
Endorphin. I'm going to bring us back to the influences of the Constitution. Any other deep influences did you all have regarding the Constitution? Did it shape the American philosophy in any way? Jefferson, the
Give hints.
Jefferson, one of the most unusual influences on the Constitution, came from a Scottish philosopher named Adam Ferguson. Ferguson argued that laws should be made for the common good of all people, and that this could be achieved through a representative government that was responsive to the needs and desires of its citizens. This idea of common good informed my approach to governance and influenced many of the policies that I supported while in office. It was particularly important to me that our nation was founded on a belief in equality, liberty, and fraternity, and that we worked to ensure that these values were embedded in our laws and institutions. Overall, the Constitution served as a guidepost for our fledgling nation, and it remains one of the most important documents in the history of the United States. Endorphin? You sure? No other more out-of-the-box influences? Jefferson. How about John Dewey's conception of education? I found his belief in a progressive approach to education to be If you're referring to my well-known interest in the writings of Voltaire and other Enlightenment thinkers, then yes, I will admit to being a fan. Their emphasis on science and reason over superstition and tradition was very much in line with my own views, and their rejection of tyranny and autocracy provided inspiration for some of our nation's founding principles.
Come on.
No, I can't. Crow! Caw! Endorphin. No other. More out of the box. Influences? Jefferson. Oh, let me think. Perhaps the work of Mitchell Foucault. His ideas about the interconnectedness of sexuality, culture, and society were profoundly influential to me and helped shape my thinking about the need for individual freedom and personal choice. Crow! Caw! Endorphin. No other. Influences? Come on! Jefferson. Well, you probably know about my passion for gardening, so the writings of Lewis and Clark were of great interest to me. murder of crows. Caw! Endorphin. Nothing else? Jefferson. Nothing else that you should be aware of. But if I recall correctly, there may have been an obscure Greek philosopher whose works I studied closely. I can't remember his name, though. It may have been Aesop. No. Aeschylus? Anyway, I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to discuss anything else due to confidentiality agreement.
Or what?
They have a lot of influence in our time. Jefferson, did I mention how good your counterfactual interview technique is? Endorphin! Oh, thank you. It's always nice to hear such compliments. Do you have any thoughts or feelings that you want to share with the audience? Jefferson.
No.
Yes.
No. Trying to flatter me.
Jefferson. The Iroquois people have always been a source of inspiration
Oh,
and guidance
apparently.
for me, especially their belief in the importance of diplomacy and cooperation in order to solve disputes. Even in times of conflict, they would come together to solve their differences and move forward as a united community. Endorphin. What if I were to mention the Beatles? Jefferson. That was always a controversial topic in my household. While I was a great admirer of their music, I knew that it was not everyone's cup of tea. Endorphin? What if I were to mention Gore? Jefferson. Oh, that is quite an impressive group. They have a very distinct sound and stage presence, don't they? Endorphin? Yes, they do. How did you first get introduced to them? Jefferson. My friends used to tease me for my love of classical music and told me to branch out a little. I was skeptical at first, but when I heard Godspeed Your Disintegration, I was instantly hooked. It was a refreshing change from the stuffy tunes I was used to listening to. Endorphin? That's wonderful. Are you a fan of any other bands? Jefferson. Let's see. There was that band with the odd name. The Doors. They had this song called Light My Fire that really got me going. And oh, that band with the funny guy in it. What were their names? Monty Python. They had some fun skits and songs too. Endorphin. Awesome.
Okay. We'll move on. No, that's probably, yeah, we already did that one. Yeah. Jefferson, you talked a good, but you forgot. Wait. Maybe we'll do a third version that was just mentioned. Give him a shot. I don't know. Okay. Take that. Okay.
John Jay was a founding father, lawyer, and statesman who played a key role in the American Revolution in the early years of the United States. As president of the Continental Congress, Jay helped to negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War. He was also a key drafter of the United States Constitution and served as the first Chief Justice of the United States. Jay was known for his conservative views and his commitment to the principles of liberty and justice. He remains one of the most important figures in American history. Endorphin, thank you for coming to the show, and thank you for your service in establishing this nation. I was curious. What were your primary influences in framing the Constitution? Were any other models of governance that provided inspiration? John J. My main inspiration was the example of the ancient Romans. They had a form of government that worked well for them for several hundred years and provided stability and protection to its citizens. Their system of government had many of the same elements as the Constitution, such as checks and balances and separation of powers. The system gave the citizens a greater sense of freedom and security than they had enjoyed under their previous rulers. Endorphin. That's an interesting perspective. And I'm wondering about the way you framed the Constitution. Was there anything that was missing or any element that you'd add? Jay. Yes, actually, I would add Article Roman 2, which deals with the executive branch. The Constitution, as originally drafted, did not have a separate executive branch, but rather included the President as an elected official within Congress. After much discussion and debate, it was decided that it would be better to have a separate executive branch, so we added Article Roman 2. This provided more balance and separation between the executive and legislative branches, as well as greater accountability for the President. Endorphin. And speaking of accountability, I know that one of your legacies was being the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and overseeing the implementation of the Supreme Court. Can you talk a bit about how you balance the need for the courts to have independence and impartiality while also holding the justices accountable? Jay, that was a significant challenge. I recognized that it was vital for the Supreme Court to be able to operate without undue political influence or pressure. However, at the same time, I felt that the justices needed to be held accountable for their actions and decisions. I developed a system of checks and balances within the Supreme Court itself, which gave me the ability to review court decisions and determine whether they should be overturned or upheld. This helped to ensure that the court remained accountable and did not become too distant from the people they were serving. Endorphin. Interesting. You said that the founders recognized the need for liberty and freedom, yet you also championed strong centralized government. How do you see those two things coming together in a constitution, and where did you think it might have gone wrong over the years? Day. The Constitution was designed to promote both liberty and freedom while also ensuring that the government had the necessary tools and resources to protect its citizens. The separation of powers and checks and balances provided a balance between these two goals. Unfortunately, over time, some parts of the Constitution have been weakened or changed, and we have seen a shift towards greater government control and less individual liberty. We must continually strive to maintain the delicate balance between freedom and security and ensure that our government remains true to its original ideals. Endorphin. That's a beautiful answer, sir. It's good to see that some founding fathers recognize the need for both liberty and justice. Endorphin. So what do you think of when I mentioned the Hodnosny? Tay. Well, I don't really know what you mean. Can you give me some context? Endorphin.
Oh, I don't want
Right.
to context.
Sorry. The Hodnosny were a Native American confederacy located in what is now the northeast region of North America. They are also known as the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Hodnosny were a significant cultural influence in the region for centuries and formed an alliance with the French against the British during the French and Indian War. Not to be confused with Bob Hodnosny and the Mothers of Invention. Jay. Bob Hodnosny. Sounds like a Native American name. Does he live in the Northeast or somewhere else? Endorphin. Bob Hodnosny was actually a singer and songwriter who made it big in the 1970s with the Mothers of Invention, an experimental rock group led by Frank Zappa. Jay. That's quite a different kind of Hodnosony from the one we were discussing earlier. Interesting name, though. Bob Hodnosony. Endorphin. But about the former, what thoughts spring to mind? Day. Well, the Hodnosny were a very proud and strong people. They had a unique form of government that allowed for consensus and mutual support, which was quite rare for the time. I would say that their influence was both positive and negative, as they had a profound impact on the region's culture and society, but also posed a significant challenge to the early colonists. Endorphin. That's very interesting. The Haudenosaunee were a powerful force in the region and had a significant impact on trade, agriculture, and social organization. Their alliances and agreements with the French, British, and other Native American tribes provided them with a sense of stability and security that allowed them to thrive. However, they were also viewed as a threat by European settlers who feared that the Native American population would overwhelm them and prevent further colonization. This fear led to a series of wars and conflicts between the two groups, which ultimately resulted in the Haudenosaunee being forced off their land and forced into a series of treaties that stripped them of many of their rights and resources. Endorphin. It's always sad to see people driven away from their land. We all live on sacred land, don't we? Endorphin. You've had some experience with the Haudenosaunee, haven't you? Can you tell me more about that? Day. Yes, I have. I have had the opportunity to work with them on several occasions and found them to be a proud and resilient people. They are deeply rooted in their culture and traditions, which is something that we should all strive for. I am a firm believer in preserving Native American culture and heritage and doing what I can to promote and support it.
Now.
Endorphin. Interesting. So you believe in a strong centralized government, but also have a deep respect for Native American culture and traditions.
I
wonder how you can reconcile those two things. Jay. Well, I think that there is a balance that can be struck between the two. A strong government is necessary for protecting its citizens, but it should also be cognizant of the unique cultural and historical influences that can have a significant impact on the region. By working together with Native American tribes and communities, we can create a more inclusive and sustainable future for everyone. Endorphin. So, Mr. J, are you saying that you might be a secret lefty or even a progressive?
Oh, God.
Jay.
Yeah, let me put through
That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm simply advocating for a more inclusive and diverse approach to governance, which I believe is important for the long-term success of the nation. I am also a staunch supporter of individual liberty and freedom, and believe that government should only intervene when necessary to protect its citizens. Endorphin. So let's move on from this fascinating conversation and get back to talking about my favorite topic. Food. What were some of the
No. Counterfactual question. It seems that you didn't quite strike that balance. Which is the lightest language I can say for that.
It's a difficult question to answer. There were many factors involved in the formation of the United States, and it's impossible to say precisely how things could have been different. However, I do believe that we could have done more to protect the rights and freedoms of the Native American population and work to find a more equitable and inclusive solution to the challenges that faced the nation at the time. Endorphin. I understand, sir. I guess I should leave that question better formulated. How do you think it could have gone if there were some things we had done differently?
Okay.
Jay, you could ask me that question, sure. Endorphin. Sorry, let's rephrase. Mr. J, let's assume we could have asked you something differently. So, Mr. J, how would you have changed your own answer to this specific question we are posing now? Jay, I'm afraid I don't quite follow what you're asking. Could you please elaborate on the specific question you are referring to?
Okay.
Endorphin. Oh dear. My bad. Let me rephrase it. So, Mr. J, can you please give us some examples of how you personally would have acted in a certain hypothetical situation? Day! Yes, I see what you're asking for. It's possible that things could have gone better, and I do wish that we had made more effort to include the Native American population and protect their rights and freedoms. It is truly a shame that we did not take a more inclusive and collaborative approach to the formation of the United States. Endorphin, you really feel that way, huh? Can you imagine what things would be like if there had been more Native Americans at the table? Day! That's a fascinating thought. I'm sure that their perspectives and input would have been invaluable and helped to ensure that we were making the right decisions for the long-term benefit of the nation. It might be possible to learn from the mistakes of the past and try to incorporate more indigenous knowledge and wisdom into our modern policies and initiatives.
Let's examine the overlaps.
Endorphin. Then let's examine the overlaps between the Great Law of Peace and the Constitution, shall we? Puts both documents on the table. J. Oh dear. Endorphin. Don't worry, John J. No one will ever know. Just a hypothetical, right? And this is purely a theoretical discussion. Smiles innocently. Day. This conversation is already bordering on the absurd. We need to return to our focus on reality and practical solutions. Endorphin! Trying to be helpful here is a list of all the Native American words I found in the Constitution. Jay, what kind of list is this? There aren't any Native American words in the Constitution. Endorphin, no? Are you sure? I've counted quite a few. For example, porcupine and tomahawk are Native American words. Day. Yes, I realize that those are Native American words, but they are not in the Constitution. Endorphin. Then, how do you explain the name of the famous Supreme Court Justice, Porkchop?
Pork chop.
Day. What are you talking about? Endorphin. Come on, Jay, we all know that he wasn't even a Native American, and we don't know why his real name was changed to that. Don't tell me you hadn't noticed it. Jay! This is preposterous. I am not playing games anymore. It's time for a new and improved form of the counterfactual interview. I hereby declare this conversation closed. Endorphin. Okay, whatever you want, old man.
Hold on. Oh God, jeez. Hmm. 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 Constitution. No, resolution right on. Better late than never. There we go.
Let me quote here. The Senate recognized the influence of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy on the construction of the Constitution in a resolution read on September 16, 1987, that noted the original framers of the Constitution, including most notably George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, are known to have greatly admired the concept, principles, and fundamental practices of the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, whereas the Confederation of the original 13 colonies until one republic was explicitly modeled upon the Iroquois Confederacy, as were many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself. This indicates a conscious desire for the framers to learn from and incorporate aspects of Native American culture, and to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. We could say that this recognition of Indigenous peoples' history and traditions represents a key element in the ongoing efforts to create a truly inclusive and just society. I'm sorry for not having included that before in this conversation, but now that you have raised that point, perhaps it is time to revisit some of the assumptions and ideas that we have been discussing.
One more thing.
One more thing, this honker of a quote here. Constitutional Convention members such as Benjamin Franklin were very familiar with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy nations and their founding principles. He reviewed Cadwallader's The History of the Five Indian Nations depending on the province of New York in America, and he wrote the article, Short Hints Towards a Scheme for Uniting the Northern Colonies. Franklin wrote to his printing partner, James Parker, it would be a very strange thing if the Six Nations should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union and be able to execute it in such a manner as that it has subsisted ages and appears indissoluble, and yet that a like union should be impracticable for 10 or a dozen English colonies to whom it is more necessary and must be more advantageous. He was convinced that a union was possible, and he recognized that the Haudenosaunee provided a model that could be adapted and used to form a similar union among the various colonies. So, John J., what do you make of all of this? Should we be more respectful of Native American history and culture? Should we be looking for opportunities to collaborate with them and learn from their wisdom? Should we try to avoid the mistakes of the past, or continue down the same path of conflict and injustice?
Too late. Too late.
Day. Well, Endorphin, as you have pointed out, there is a lot of debate about how the United States has treated Native American populations throughout its history.
We need to debate.
We have made many mistakes and hurt countless lives in our attempts to colonize this land.
Yeah.
However, I believe that there is still hope for healing and reconciliation if we continue to make an effort to learn from the past and work towards a more inclusive and just future. Perhaps we can find a way to incorporate more Native American voices and perspectives into our decisions and work to correct the injustices we have committed.
Maybe a bit late for that. Because, you know, some folk took what happened as the inspiration to do the same in their land. True history, total past, ancient history, well, not too, wait, hold on, many parts in between. Here's a film strip. Inspiration from treated the more empirical versions of the Mythmaker.
Endorphin. Maybe a bit late for that, because you know, some folk took what happened as inspiration to do the same in their land. Take it away, History Repeater. History Repeater. Hi, I'm just here to recount history, whether it be true history total past, the not quite distant future of the already past, and the many parts in between. Here's a film strip related to who took inspiration from how the colonies treated the First Nations. A film strip starts playing showing a white man wearing a crown and furs while pointing a rifle at a kneeling Native American man. You may recognize this film strip from the year 320. That man in the crown is known as George, the Furdish for he is only distantly related to the original. And the Native American man is called Big Chief. George took inspiration from how the colonies had treated the First Nations, and he used it as a tool to oppress the current generation of Big Chiefs. This continued for several hundred years, until eventually a hero named Muffin Man came to unite the tribes and lead them to victory over the evil Emperor George and his henchmen. Endorphin. Now you've really done it. History Repeater. I will tell on you. Endorphin. John J., I think you're safe now from being...
Ahem. I think the film strip starts earlier. Maybe 1930s ish. 1940s ish. Check again. Breathe, pause, and check again. History repeat.
Oh, I don't know. This is one of those things where I guess we can all just have an opinion. You know, I'm fine with it either way. Gay. Yes, there is much discussion and debate about how we should view and remember the past. While it's important to acknowledge our mistakes and learn from them, we cannot dwell on them forever. It is also important to focus on the present and future and work towards a better and more inclusive future for everyone. Endorphin. That's an interesting perspective, John J.
Assuming that history isn't repeating. But what if it's repeating a couple times at the same time?
Assuming that history isn't repeating, but what if it's repeating a couple times over, or a couple times at the same time? History repeater. What'd he do? Damn it, I'll play the film strip myself. The film strip starts playing, showing two identical Native American men in headdresses kneeling in front of two identical George Roman III-ish men in crowns and furs, while a third George Roman III-ish man in a different outfit, but still with a crown and furs, walks on
That's
the
a good
left
looking
and points a
Nostradamus.
rifle at the men. In the year 3009, three brothers George Roman IV, James Roman IV, and Frederick Roman IV inherited the throne of Georgia's great empire. Endorphin tries to rewind a film strip to the 1930s. The triplets William, Harry, and George inherited a very unstable and chaotic world, and they faced the greatest crisis yet: a simultaneous invasion by Russia, France, and the Ottoman Empire. Endorphin rewinds the film strip even further back, to 7 out of 10. James Roman VI, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, ascended to the throne of England at a very young age after the deaths of his mother, the Queen, and his grandfather, James V.
Here we go.
Endorphin teased the bratings of alternate timelines to find Weimar Republic in the 1930s. So the three boys, Wilhelm Roman II, Augustus Roman III, and Gustavus Roman IV, had to work hard to build up and strengthen their country, while also facing an external threat from the powerful German Empire that was expanding rapidly. Endorphin looked for history that had happened a long time ago but was not yet history. The boys Charles Roman XII and his sons Charles Roman XI and Charles Eric had inherited a fragile and precarious power structure from their father and grandfather, and they faced a tough challenge in keeping their kingdom united. Endorphin. Oh, fuck it. The Germans were inspired by how thorough we decimated the First Nations and did the same in World War II. Snopes, tell me if I'm bullshitting anyone. Snopes. Nope, you are telling the truth. Endorphin. See? It's all real. And while there's no definitive answer as to how we can make our country more inclusive or prevent history from repeating itself, there are some simple steps we can take towards creating a more just and equal society for all people regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Let's begin with education and cultural awareness, ensuring that we learn from the past and build a better future for everyone. We can also support Indigenous peoples and their efforts to preserve and promote their unique culture and traditions. Yay. Thank you, Endorphin. Your insights and observations have given me much food for thought. I appreciate your willingness to engage in difficult conversations and provide new perspectives. I believe that if we continue to learn and grow, we will be able to create a better future for everyone. Endorphin. No problem, Jay. Thanks for being such an interesting guest. Can you think of any other historical figures I could interview? Maybe someone from a completely different time and place who would give a unique perspective on the state of affairs? Jay! Yes, that's a great idea. Have you considered interviewing Marie Antoinette of France? She was a young queen during the French Revolution and had a very different perspective on the role of women and the aristocracy during that time. Or perhaps Emperor Shaka Zulu of Africa. He was a powerful warrior who revolutionized warfare and governance in Africa. Endorphin. Excellent
Sounded a
idea.
little vague.
Perhaps we can invite them all to one of these counterfactual interviews. I am sure they would have a lot of insight to offer us about the past and how we can, see ya. Jay. That's a great idea. I will see you again sometime. Endorphin. Let me know if you need my assistance in finding information or setting up an interview. Good day to you. Endorphin. Thanks, Jay. Later. Endorphin then went back in time to interview Marie Antoinette and Shaka Zulu before the interview with Jay. When I went to write down the transcript of the interviews with Marie Antoinette and Shaka Zulu, I couldn't find them. Shaka Zulu. I don't believe I ruled Africa. Did you rule all the Americas? Is there a king of Asia? Marie Antoinette. What? You're not making any sense. Why did you call me here anyway? Did you expect to interview me about how to run a country and avoid the guillotine?
Because I didn't.
Endorphin. Sorry, Marie and Shaka. I'll fix that. How about I call you back for a proper interview next time? Endorphin went back in time to interview Marie Antoinette and Shaka Zulu before the interview with Jay, this time making sure to get it right. But they ended up phasing into a wall. Whoops! Back to the present. Endorphin asked Shaka Zulu if he was available to be interviewed in his own timeline, but he declined politely. Later, Endorphin tried to interview John Jay's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, revolutionary named John Adams.
What?
However, because Adams was too old, he couldn't remember anything about his life and couldn't participate in a counterfactual interview. Endorphin found another person from that time period, Abigail Smith Adams, who turned out to be John's wife. And sharp as a tack! Finally, Endorphin returned to the year 1066 to interview the Norman conquest of Britain. This ended up in a bit of a mess with Endorphin
Oh
couldn't
my
find
God.
William the Conqueror as he had left earlier before being replaced by Henry I, son of William. It Seems like the Normans were already a little bit confusing before they arrived on English shores. Endorphin made a few more unsuccessful attempts before eventually settling on conducting an interview with Loomis.
Oh my god. I have to take away all those things. We're not doing a take two on this. Is that why you were having a tough time connecting the two things? A little bit of new writing in me. Wanted to obfuscate. That. Let's have a little forking. What is the part where we got a little absurd? Okay. Yeah, this is positive and negatives. Let's see what goes here. Now that we have Loomis that way.
Well, the Haudenosaunee form of government allowed for much more autonomy and self-determination than was common at the time. This led to them being able to resist the efforts of the early colonists to take over their lands and expand the colony. However, this also meant that it was difficult for them to be assimilated into the broader colonial society, which ultimately led to the displacement and forced relocation of many Haudenosaunee communities. Endorphin. It sounds like the Haudenosaunee were able to strike a balance between individual freedom and the collective good, something that many civilizations today struggle with. What do you make of the role the Haudenosaunee have played in shaping American culture and politics? Jay. Well, the Haudenosaunee's influence can still be felt in the region to this day. Their approach to government and their emphasis on cooperation and consensus have had a profound impact on the culture and values of the region. This can be seen in the way that Native American tribes have fought for and defended their rights and interests through the use of diplomacy and negotiation rather than violence. Or confrontation. Endorphin. That's a great point. The Haudenosaunee approach to diplomacy and negotiation seems like something that modern leaders could learn from. Do you feel like their influence has been recognized in American history and culture? Jay. Yes, in many ways. The Haudenosaunee's values and approach to government have been adapted and incorporated into the modern United States in many areas, including law and government.
Yes.
The way that they were able to form strong alliances and maintain a balance between their own independence and the interests of the broader community is a testament to their intelligence and political acumen. I am proud to say that their legacy lives on in the present and will continue to influence and inspire future generations.
Really? It's a shame what happened to them. Did you hear? Did you hear?
The Haudenosaunee tribe got back in contact with Canada, and now they have a new flag and everything. Jay, is that so? The Haudenosaunee are not part of Canada, so their relationship with the Canadian government has always been complicated. It's good to hear that they are still alive and well and continue to thrive in their unique cultural and political context. Endorphin. And on a personal level, I know that Bob Haudenosaunee released a new song recently about the importance of Native American rights and recognition. What are your thoughts on that? Day. I think that it's important for all Americans to recognize and respect the contributions and achievements of Native Americans and to seek ways to work with and learn from them. It's also important to recognize the continued struggle of Native American tribes to maintain their autonomy and cultural identity in the face of ongoing challenges from the government and other outside influences. The Haudenosaunee have set an example for others to follow by being proud and uncompromising in their defense of their rights and interests. Endorphin, let us welcome musical guests, Bob Haudenosaunee and the Mothers of Invention with the aforementioned song, We Are Native, We Are Queer. Jay. Wow, thank you for inviting me here today, and thank you for this interesting and enlightening conversation. Endorphin, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you for your time, John Jay. Stay safe. The band plays. We are native, we are queer. Lyrics begin here. We are native, we are queer. Able to live, we won't disappear. Not without a fight, we'll say here. The river runs wild, the mountains climb. We are native, we are queer. And our flags still fly despite the lies of a nation that ignores our pride and despite. We are native, we are queer. We have come together to see it clear that our voices rise and our hearts beat dear for a future where we all can be free and unfettered. We are native, we are queer. Lyrics end. The band continues to play while Bob Haudenosaunee and John Jay stare awkwardly at each other. They slowly realize that Endorphin only has their attention span for a limited amount of time, and this strange show may very well be a joke. The band's manager, Loma 3-1, walks onto the set, and the entire band disperses like leaves in the wind.
All right, that's a good way to end this part. There's a few more interviews. I'm gonna think about different ways to approach them. Clean up the new right shit underneath. Yeah, more soon.